Welcome to the Nature of Education podcast. On today's episode, we have Aoife Hughes, and we are going to be talking a little bit about the work that Aoife does as an ADHD coach and some of the work she also has done in terms of mental health in education. So, Aoife, welcome to the podcast.
Cormac, how are you? Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for agreeing to come on because, we've talked a few times at this point just about education and mental health and ADHD. And I thought you'd be a brilliant person to bring on to the podcast because of your wisdom in this area and having been a teacher for so many years as well. So I suppose first off, if you'd just like to maybe introduce a bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Sure. So I am an ADHD coach, but that's been a very new career path. I was a primary school teacher for many years before that. And it was being a teacher pre-pandemic, I'll say, that myself and my colleague, we noticed that we were not trained to cope with what we were being presented with in the classroom, high levels of anxiety. It just felt like we were just crawling and drowning almost in how to support the kids in their emotional well-being. So we set about setting up a program, and obviously we did a lot of research and tried to see what was out there. And the gap we saw that was missing was information that's being given to everybody at the same time. Not like, well, the ideal was that the content that we created would be delivered to children, teachers and parents and, eventually the wider community like coaches. Because in order to support children's mental health and, everybody's mental health, it makes sense if first of all, if we know the language, which is a skill that has to be taught and isn't being, and then if we're all speaking the same language. So that business was called Be Well, Do Well. And it was a huge labour of love. We were driven and fueled by our passion for making a change in children's mental health. Both myself and Shauna, we had struggled, ourselves. And I didn't understand then. And I don't understand now. How can all of this information be out there and we're still not getting it to our kids? It's just beyond my comprehension. And what I also learned with Be Well, Do Well is that it's very difficult to get past the gatekeepers of children's mental health, being principals, some teachers, some parents. What we were dealing with is that people don't actually even know what mental health is. And then they'd come back to us a few months later when a child was, in a really hyper anxious state, and that's out of our remit. We were in the preventative phase. It was a preventative model. It was all education based. So that really, I took that to heart. I took that really hard, and I kept driving that machine for a long time. And there's only so much rejection you can take. We went wherever people kind of wanted us, but it was just really sad. And I still see the likes of Brezzy, he's doing these unbelievable challenges to raise money to get a free program into schools. It's like, what's going on? I don't understand this. So it came to 2021 and we had to move to America for my husband's training. I wasn't allowed to work over there. I knew I was burnt out from the education system, but I didn't have a choice to leave prior to that point. So I really took that opportunity when we moved to America to decompress and to retrain. So I trained then, just before that, I got my own ADHD diagnosis. And I was constantly trying to find the missing pieces of the Aoife puzzle. Why was life always such a struggle? And I wanted desperately to break the cycle for my kids and my students. So when I got my ADHD diagnosis, a lot made sense. And then I learned about ADHD coaching, and my husband had spoken to me about possibly going into coaching for my mental health work. So when I was in America, then I trained as a life coach and an ADHD coach, and that's what I'm doing today, based in Sligo. Work mainly with people online, but I also work with an organisation in Sligo, face to face with people, and I just love it. And the difference is between this and Be Well Do Well is that people are seeking me out. So it's nice not to feel like I'm banging on brick walls, you know.
Thank you for sharing that, Aoife. And yeah, I think the work that you're doing is so important and so needed. And I know I listened to your podcast on the Sligo show there just recently, and yeah, it's great that you're, you know, here for people who are struggling with ADHD, because it's, I suppose people are starting to realize more and more, like getting late diagnosis, and also for young people, and giving parents tools how to help their kids. And yeah, also just wanted to honor the work that you have done with developing your program and pushing to get that into schools. I know it's not always easy to push these things into the schools, and yeah, I suppose it's good for me to, you know, be speaking to you today, just because we're of a similar, you know, heart set maybe instead of mindset, but yeah, wanting to get this work into schools. So yeah, I'd love to maybe talk a little bit more just about ADHD, and just for maybe some people, because I think there's lots of confusion around the topic of what it is. So could you maybe outline some of the symptoms of ADHD?
I will indeed, yeah. We prefer to call them traits, and I'll be taken from the leaders in the field, quoting their work. So Russell Barkley, he breaks it down into 7 elements that ADHDers have difficulty with. I know I'm not going to remember them all now, but the like self-motivation, self-awareness, inhibition, emotional regulation, planning and problem solving, working memory. And, you know, Ed Halliwell, he refers to ADHD brains as being like Ferrari cars with bicycle brakes. And, you know, it's such a great analogy. And it's so lovely to have an analogy like that when you're explaining it to kids as well, because they get it. Like, neurodivergent people love when things make sense. And what doesn't make sense is the name for ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We don't have a deficit of attention. The problem is we can pay attention. It's our challenge is around the regulation piece. ADHD is characterized by 3 elements: impulsivity, hyperactivity, and inattentiveness. So, you know, that can look like being like distracted, daydreaming, risk-taking, making impulsive decisions, being really creative, brilliant in a crisis, but really struggling day to day with basic things. You know, my whole life I could never understand how people have it all together. I still don't, but I have a lot more compassion and understanding for myself. Like, honestly, there's a really long list. Like, some of the things that I learned about when I did my training that really, like, I was like, wow. So rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So ADHDers can perceive other people's comments as criticism or judgment. And not only do we perceive them, but that perception then can send us into a shame spiral in a nanosecond. And that can be quite, you know, debilitating and have a big effect on our relationships. Rumination, imposter syndrome, perfectionism. I would never have called myself a perfectionist, like, never. But it wasn't until I was working with my own ADHD coach and I was talking about my content, so especially my webinars or my, you know, the PowerPoints, whatever that you're putting together. And he just was like, it sounds like, you know, you might be struggling with perfectionism there. I was like, excuse me? No, that. And then I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is, you know. So that can be a big piece for ADHDers as well. Low self-esteem, an overwhelming sense of being misunderstood, novelty seeking. So that means our brains are constantly seeking novelty. So let's say, for example, I have a gratitude journal after about 2 months, I won't even see that. You know, it's like I'll need to cover it or something. It's called resparklising. That's a term that was coined by one of the ladies that we trained with. Honestly, the list is endless. Hyper-focus, so that there's that attention piece. So like when I was in school, my brain was amazing at focusing on maths. But like in English and history and geography, I was climbing the walls, driving my friends mad, driving my teachers crazy because I couldn't focus. We have interest wired brains. So if something isn't interesting, our brains check out. So for example, like housework isn't very interesting for a lot of ADHD people. So that can be a real struggle. For me, when I was a teacher, loved working with the kids. I couldn't bear the paperwork, and I cannot tell you the amount of paperwork that's involved in it's just mind-boggling. So that was a real challenge in that part of my career. And I always felt like an imposter, even though I knew I was a great teacher. The imposter syndrome I had around, especially because of all the paperwork that I wasn't able to do. And then in my own business, then I love being a coach. I love creating content. But when it comes to the admin stuff and, you know, the numbers, it's like, oh my God, you know, so like boredom can be such a difficult feeling for ADHDers that it can actually trigger the pain centers in our brain. So that's why, you know, and then we have the low levels of dopamine and noradrenaline. They're like neurotransmitters that are linked to motivation and reward. So we need, like, our brains are constantly seeking dopamine, but unfortunately, if we don't have helpful dopamine outlets, we're going to seek any dopamine outlets, and a lot of them can be unhelpful. So that can come in the form of, you know, distracting your mates or drinking or eating the wrong food, you know, doom scrolling, binge watching TV. I could go on.
Yeah, that was a brilliant overview of it all. And apologies I said symptoms. It just shows that that's what I've probably heard before. But traits makes more sense. And thank you for giving us that kind of insight into what it's like. Obviously, you know, I think one of the things with this is people seem to say, you know, we're all a bit on the spectrum where we all have, you know, something. So just assuming that they understand what it's like. But, you know, what would you say to that if someone said, you know, we're all a little bit, you know, hard to focus?
I actually did a post on this on my Instagram yesterday because I can't get over the amount of people who say it, and not just regular people. I'm talking about people in positions of authority and power. And so first of all, I would say the word you use there is massive assumption. You know, it's like, would you say to somebody, well, everybody can do karate? No, you know, you have to be trained, and, you know, there's all these many layers and levels with karate. I don't know why I'm thinking of karate, but there you go. That's my brain. But it's okay. You might think, okay, you might say, oh, well, everybody's a bit forgetful, or everybody's a bit sensitive, or everybody's a bit this. But do you feel it to the nth degree? You know, do you have really intense levels of anxiety, low self-esteem, you know, major burnout, high levels of anger, zero self-trust as a result of those, you know, traits? And it's really invalidating. And unfortunately, that's the way our society is made up. Again, listening is a skill that needs to be taught explicitly, and it isn't. So, you know, in Be Well, Do Well, we used to talk about in the world of psychology, it's called the invalidating environment. But when I give talks to parents, and, you know, this is something that we coined in Be Well, Do Well, it was, you know, the emotional Band-Aid, the Irish Band-Aid. You know, she'll be grand. Oh, I think I've ADHD. Oh, sure, everybody has it. It's like, no, that doesn't make me feel better. That actually makes me feel crap, and it makes me feel like I can't trust you, or I don't feel safe in your company. And then it also makes me second guess myself. And anybody who wonders if they've ADHD or autism, you know, they haven't just plucked that out of the sky. It's usually because they're really struggling They're suffering on so many levels, and they're trying to, it's almost like they're trying to grasp for air and put the pieces of the puzzle together, but they can't figure it out. So then they soundboard the people in their life that they, you know, they trust or love. And then when they reflect back to them, Asher, everybody is, it's just so, it's so damaging, you know. And this was my piece of Be Well, Do Well, and it's my piece still now. Education. And I love this podcast, Cormac. Education is key. And, you know, I don't understand what the block is with schools around all of this. It's so detrimental, and the damage that's been done, the trauma that's been caused, especially to neurodivergent kids in schools, but to all children, the disservice that we're doing by not teaching them about their brains, by not teaching them the skill of emotional literacy. Like, one of my least favourite, I know my brain is going off on one now, but one of my least favourite pieces of advice in the mental health world, and especially around suicide awareness, is just talk to somebody. Talk to somebody. Maybe this person, or we're constantly talking to people, but the problem is people aren't listening. And also, for people to talk, they need to be able to access certain parts of their brain. But that part of our brain can shut down when we're in a highly stressed state. So being able to talk sometimes isn't feasible. So then that makes people feel even worse. So my message is, please learn the skill of listening and empathy, you know. And again, it's that message of be kind. Like, what does that look like, sound like, and feel like? You know, we need to be more explicit, and it's not that hard. Like, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I spent the last years just doing a deep dive into all of this content. And I'm like, God, if I can learn it, why do I have this information? And no more than yourself, Cormac, you know, like, why is it on us? And Brezzy, like, what is happening? It's, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all that. And yeah, I would have had the same, you know, when you hear just talk, and I'm like, there's so much more than that we need to do. And as you said, sometimes talking to someone can completely invalidate your experience if they're not the right person. So I think there is, I don't know if it was you saying it on that podcast, but, you know, there is maybe this thing in Irish society where we don't really want to look at the emotional stuff. So it's that fear to really look there, that we're like, oh, we all have it, or oh, it's grand, or get over it kind of thing, attitude. I know you might not hear those words all the time in schools, but I think that the fear to go into some of the emotions is still there. And, you know, even with, like, we go in, and I'm sure it'd be good to actually share notes in terms of the program you developed, because our workshop sounds similar in many ways, where we go into the primary schools and deliver emotional resilience workshops. And one part of it as well, we get them to practice listening, and like, what is listening and how do you actually like practice it? And because they all just want to talk, but like, yeah, we see the teachers nearly uncomfortable with the emotional exercises, and I'm like, we're teaching it to 4th, 5th and 6th class, so 10, 11, 12-year-olds, but the teachers themselves get so much from it, because they're like, oh my God, I didn't, you know, even have access to these emotions myself. So it's just amazing that we, as human beings, we just aren't taught this in education. Like, such a fundamental part of being a human being is emotions, and I think they're coming and going all the time. And yeah, hopefully now, like, there's a positive movement towards well-being in recent times, and yeah, I think it will take, we'll see how long it takes, but it is just kind of opening up to that kind of new way of, I suppose not new way, but opening up to that more feeling, because I think our society is just so much in the head, and yeah, I think that's one of the problems with mental health. We're just stuck in the head. We need to actually get into the emotions and the body. Just in terms of, yeah, if you want to, I suppose we've kind of touched on that a little bit. I was going to say, if you wanted to go into how the system, you were in the system for 20 years, I think, was it? And yeah, how did it break you?
So when you become a teacher, the goal is to get a permanent pensionable job. And I got one very quickly, and, it was really revered. But then I had to move with my husband's job. So we had to move around Ireland, and teaching is not set up for moving. So you become quite institutionalized when you're in the same school. Like, every school is so different. Even though we all have the same curriculum, every school is so different, and which is great. But as a teacher who had many years of experience, that meant nothing when I was going to other schools. So that in itself is quite disheartening. And so there's this, that's like a whole other podcast. But then when we set up Be Well, Do Well, and like in my naivety, I was like, oh my God, I can't, like, the whole world, wait till they hear. All you have to do to really make a difference in a kid's life is to first teach them the fundamentals of how their brains work, and then teach them the skill of emotional literacy. And then from that, you can teach them cognitive behavioral education. And this is a game changer. And it was just brick wall, brick wall, brick wall, brick wall, brick wall. Like, I worked in a school, Cormac, and this is before I even went into the mental health stuff. And I started doing mindfulness, like breathing practices with the kids. And I went on mat leave. And when I came back, there was a policy that we weren't allowed to do it because it wasn't in line with the Catholic ethos. Now, I know many of the other teachers continued it behind closed doors, as I did. But even for that to be spoken is shocking, And this was in a DESH school where there was a lot of challenges and trauma. And so you were just constantly up against it, That said, I didn't keep my mouth shut, so I didn't do myself any favours. I was very vocal. My CV, when we were moving, literally had mental health written all over it. And some schools I didn't even get jobs because of it. And I know it's because of that. Or I'd get one day subbing there, and then I'd naively go and tell them, look, I have this program, yada, yada, yada. And then I wouldn't get a phone call back. It's just like, oh my God, am I doing something wrong here? Like, I don't really understand. Like this, and especially as a neurodivergent person, this didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And I didn't know I was neurodivergent at the time. And then the more I taught and the more I learned about mental health, the more I suffered secondary trauma. I was like, what are we doing to our kids? What are we doing? And the expectations that are put on teachers are, there's no words. Like, the curriculum is ridiculous. The amount of subjects that we're supposed to be able to teach and to be very knowledgeable in. There was very, well, in my time, which wasn't that long ago, I'd like to say, but there was very little diversification allowed. So you might have a teacher in the school who's really skilled in the Irish language. And all she would love to do is go around to every class and teach Irish. And I tell you that I don't know a teacher in the country who wouldn't love to have somebody coming in who comes naturally to them. But she wasn't allowed. It's like, we weren't allowed to swap our skills. Like, there was no forward thinking. It was very much, it's very authoritative. Like, you feel like a student when you're a teacher in some schools. I don't want to taint everybody with the same brush. I will say that the last school I taught in, the principal there was very, she was very much allowed us into the classrooms to teach our content. And all the teachers were like, when are you coming in? When are you coming in? When are you coming in? But that was really rare, and then when I learned over time that when it comes to mental health education, you have to leave it to the ripple effect. you have to, so I would teach, I was like, right, okay, Aoife, just stop, just pull back and just do it with your own kids and your own students. And a few months later, then people would come to me and they'd say, oh, what's that thing you did? And what's the thing you said? And my kids are saying this and it's really helping and yada, yada, yada. But it was all really slow, and I honestly couldn't cope. I couldn't cope. And then the other thing, then when the pandemic hit, it was all of that amplified. And we came back after the pandemic and still mental health was not a priority. And I was just raging. I loved working with my students. Like all of the students I worked with, Dublin, Galway, inner city, mainstream, when I was a additional needs teacher, it was just fantastic. But it's the system, it's the curriculum, it's the expectations, it's the paperwork. And the more I learn about how non-neuro-affirming schools are for students, that's the same again for teachers. And I'd love to know what it's really like. Actually, I did a small poll on my Instagram account about asking neurodivergent teachers to share their, experience in school. Is it something that they feel comfortable disclosing? Is it something that they feel supported in? And the results were 80-20 to no. No, they didn't feel supported. No, they didn't feel like they could disclose. And that speaks volumes. And if you are a principal and you're not supporting your neurodivergent staff, then what does that say for your neurodivergent kids? And I was actually at the As I Am conference last Saturday, and Dr. Luke Bearden was talking, and one of his things he was advocating for was more autistic teachers so that autistic children would have role models. And I would say that across the board. I mean, our Irish system it's very white. We have the Catholic barrier, and then there's the neurodivergent and the lack of diversity across the board. So the other thing that tipped the whole situation over the edge was I was working in, so at the time it was called special education. And so I was an SET, a special education teacher. But because of the shortage of substitute teachers, we were pulled left, right and centre to go into classrooms. And I now know that was really difficult for my neurodivergent brain. But I also had a real sense of injustice for all. And I wasn't the only one, like everybody felt it, like we had no other choice. But just failing kids every day. And it doesn't have to be that hard. And you know that as well, Cormac, like it doesn't have to be that hard. And this is what I don't understand. Like what's happening that it's so hard. So yeah, my mental health had taken enough. And I said to my husband, I knew when we were going to America, we'd be coming back to another county, Sligo. And I said to my husband, I can't start at the bottom again. I can't do it. And yeah, so hence the change.
Yeah, it sounds like some journey for you, but I think also it's probably informed all the work you're doing now. So yeah, it sounds like a difficult one at times trying to get this in there. But yeah, now at least you have a great understanding of, how schools work and principals and teachers and parents and everything. So one thing I wanted to just ask you is, you spoke a bit there about the teachers, and I think I was chatting to someone recently and he was saying that, a lot of teachers go into this work because they have, this certain level of compassion. Maybe not all of them, but most of them want to, genuinely help young people. And I think, as you said there, it's the system that really stops that. And you kind of see maybe that enthusiasm they had going in starting to like dwindle a bit. And because of that, strict system that's on them. But what advice would you give to educators you know, in terms of how to help students with ADHD or even autism, or like how do they, you know, what can they do to kind of approach those students in a more caring way?
Yeah, I love that question. There are so many phenomenal teachers who were in teaching for the same reason I was in teaching. And when it comes to supporting neurodivergent children, the first step is education, is alongside compassion. And if you don't understand it, you don't have to understand something to be empathetic and compassionate. Unfortunately, there is a lot of eye rolling when it comes to the ADHD diagnosis piece. You know, it's like, oh, here's another one, you know. And but in terms of how to support on a practical level, I would, you know, ask the schools to get training, because most schools, well, all schools have to do, you know, their Croke Park hours and certain number of training, whatever, throughout the year. So that's an option. I'll give myself a shameless plug and say I deliver webinars, or, you know, that's an option for secondary schools and primary schools. And in the classroom then, or in the school, like believing them, lots of grace and understanding. It's not a case of that they won't concentrate, it's that they can't concentrate. You know, ask them what they need, you know, and if they're struggling with an area, tap into their amazing skill of creativity and problem solving and ask them, look, and validate them. Look, I can see this is really not your thing. I get it. You know, what's a way that we can make this work for your brain? Movement. And I talk about this a lot, and, you know, people are like, yeah, we do the movement. And I'm like, no, movement for ADHDers is medicinal. Lack of movement is considered to be the same as taking a depressant. And this is taken from Dr. John Ratey, again, another leader in the field of ADHD. So, you know, there are lots of schools doing wonderful things, and they're incorporating more movement into their days, which is great. But even to give ADHDers and all neurodivergent kids in the classroom the opportunity or the option to get up and walk around whenever they need to, you know, or more often, or even like the seating. Oh, don't get me started on the seating in schools. Like anytime I do talks in schools, and I'm sure you see the same, the teachers can't sit still, you know, because the chairs are really uncomfortable, and the teachers chat a lot because they're human, you know, but yet we have the completely different expectations of kids. So if you can't sit still on that chair for 6 hours, how can we expect kids? So one thing I say to some of my parent clients is to maybe consider the possibility of bringing in a more, you know, you can get these stools that you can rock on or you can twist on and, you know, whatever. And I in one school, I suggested maybe getting those fit balls, you know, but straight away the fear came out, oh, we're not getting them all fit balls, you mad? And it's like, well, are you mad? Because if you get them fit balls, you are going to tick so many boxes that, you know, you're ticking the movement, the regulation, you know, their balance, their core, and their concentration, you know. And this is the thing, there's so much lack of trust of children and their abilities. It's just, and I really want to share how I've come to that. Is our children go to the Sligo Sudbury school. So we made that decision based on my experience in schools, based on their experience in the education system in America, which was pretty dire. And we just wanted to try something else. And to say the difference is night and day is unbelievable. And And what I see in both my children is assertiveness, confidence. Sudbury schools, for anybody who doesn't know, they're self-directed and democratic. So the kids and the staff run the school together, and there's just the level of trust the children have is unbelievable. So we've learned, as a result, and we were doing a bit of it beforehand, but like we involve our kids in a lot of the decision making as a family. When it comes to setting boundaries, they're part of the conversation. There's no such thing as power over kids. And I think this is a big issue in schools. And that's why so many neurodivergent kids react to that. So it causes a huge amount of strain on their nervous system, but also to their sense of justice. It's like, it doesn't make sense. And one of my favorite things that I read, some meme somewhere, is that neurodivergent people feel things before they can articulate them. So all of these quote unquote behavioral issues are literally cries for help or red flags that the system, that things aren't working and that the things are broken. So a little understanding goes a long way. And I will say that for people to really understand ADHD, they need to understand, or it makes such a big difference when they understand the brain, just on a just basic neuroscience. Because when you understand how a neurotypical brain works, then you've a much deeper understanding of neurodivergence.
Yeah, brilliant advice there. And yeah, there's the practical piece of just understanding basic neuroscience, but also, as you said, just having compassion is one of the most powerful things you can do. And just trying to understand from their point of view. You don't have to know everything about ADHD or all of these things. You just, having that core of compassion and seeing young people as individuals, not unique individuals, not just, they're just children, they don't know anything. I think that is a big part of the problem, is we don't see the potential in young people to teach us something. We think because we're adults, we know everything. But like from doing workshops with, especially primary school, you're just amazed at some of the stuff they come out with. I was in the workshop in Wicklow earlier this week, and we were just asking them questions like, what do you think resilience is? What do you think, what are emotions and all of this? And the answers they were coming out with, I was like, I don't even need to do this workshop. You know this already. Like they know it deep inside if we actually take the time to ask and listen. And yeah, I feel like there is something there. Again, maybe it's just, I don't know if it's in other countries as much, but in Ireland there is that, children should kind of just be, not listened to or whatever. And I suppose children only got their rights like not that long ago. So I think that kind of is still there a little bit of like, don't listen to the kids. But yeah, I think that's such an important part, is just bring them into the conversation and ask them what they need. So yeah, thank you for that. And just in terms of, I suppose, how you would work with someone, so you specifically work with the parents, and is, so say there is a parent who has an ADHD child and they want support, how would that work? And if they went to you, like what would you work on?
So yeah, I work with parents, not the child, because I learned from the work with Be Well, Do Well is that you can teach kids and talk to kids and coach kids. But if the parents are not getting the message, then it stops with the kid. But when you work with the parents, it ripples down and out to everybody else in the family. So when a parent reaches out to me, I set up a call just to make sure that A, I'm a right fit, and B, that the service that they're looking for is what they need. And so I would always at that call, I have an intake form kind of just to get an idea of, what's going on for them. And they have the option if they want to fill that in. And then, so we would look at the areas that maybe, like, let's say if their child is struggling with self-esteem or emotional regulation, all the layers of ADHD, you know, and so then we would set up like it's usually a 6-week kind of stint that, you know, because when it comes to the brain, there is no quick fix. Yes, I give webinars and talks and I can do consultations, but real change comes over time and with that support over time. And so coaching is all about partnering with the person. Again, it's not power over, it's partnership with. And, you know, all coaches see their clients as creative, resourceful and whole. And many parents that come to me can be quite distressed, quite anxious, and just really, you know, broken as well by their experience of how their child is being treated in school. I will say the amount of stories that I'm hearing lately, people reaching out to me and talking to me about how their kids are being treated in school. It's just so wrong on so many levels. And then at home, you know, there are the ADHD kids who hold it all together in school. But when they come home, then, you know, it's just that Coke bottle effect. And for many parents, it's like, well, what do I do and how do I do it? So, so coaching takes ADHD coaching takes a strengths-based approach. I also, you know, look at help them find out what their values are so they can be guided by that, because for many parents of neurodivergent children, as I say to them, like, whatever you thought about parenting and whatever you see in society or hear, that all goes out the window, you know. So there's a lot of unlearning that comes with being a parent of a neurodivergent child. And so then we just work through what their goals are, what their areas that they're trying to support their child in. And we take it, you know, all at their pace, but with the view that when they come to a session, that by the end of it, they feel empowered, energized, informed, and, you know, they have things in place that they've, you know, that they've, what's the word? That they've come up with. Sorry, not a great word. Anyway. And, it's incredible work. It's really cool because, you know, not only are they learning how to support their child, but they're deepening their understanding of ADHD and strengthening their connection with their child. And you even see as well, the parent will, you know, their confidence and their self-esteem in themselves and their parenting. You know, there's just so many positive ripple effects as a result. And I do coach people on how to advocate for their children in school, because a lot of parents are just, and they don't realize it's like they trust the schools more than they trust themselves or their children, because that's the way society tells them they should be. And I say to everybody, there's ways and means of advocating, but 100%, if you don't advocate for your child, nobody else will. And what parents are experiencing on behalf of, like, you know, or their kids are experiencing, it's not okay. Like, it's not okay. And no more than anything, change with mental health has to come from grassroots. It's the same with the change in our system. You know, teachers don't have a voice. It's the principals and the boards of management and the Department of Education. They're the gatekeepers. I guarantee you, like, a lot of teachers would love to see change in the system as well. So there's a lot that parents, you know, can do to find out to support themselves and their kids.
Brilliant. Yeah, and it's great to see you doing that work now that really lights you up, and being such a great support for parents in that and for their kids. So if anyone is interested, I'll leave your details in the show notes for your website if people are interested to check that out. And yeah, I think overall, yeah, there is resistance there to this kind of work going into schools, but we're hoping to work with you on some upcoming projects for developing some programs with Wolf Academy, and we'll see what we can come up with. And it might just take a bit more time than we had hoped originally. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Aoife. It's been great chatting with you, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you somewhere in Sligo soon.
Well, thank you, Cormac, and yeah, thanks for all the work that yourself and Wolf Academy are doing. And yeah, it fills me with hope. There is a movement, and it's an amazing movement. You know, do I want things to be fixed yesterday? 100%. But I'm so grateful that, you know, we are where we are today, and that more and more people are coming to the mental health education table.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Aoife. And yeah, that wraps up today's episode. If you do want to get in touch with Aoife, you can check out her details in the show notes. And I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Nature of Education podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening. And if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any recommendations for guests, also please reach out. You can check out what we do at wolfacademy.ie, and you can get in touch there. So thank you guys, and I'll see you next time.